Hello and welcome to episode 132 of the Dive Down, a Magic the Gathering podcast focused on the latest decks, trends, and strategies for the casual spike. My name is Stanislav here in Chicago, and with me on the line from Denver, Colorado, it's the one and only Shane Beeps.
My God, I'm so glad we're behind us, the safety of the screen now. The protective layers of technology between us. We'll have fewer audio issues, I hope.
We're all in our own isolation chambers, bringing our isolated thoughts here to the Dive Down right now.
What's the worst that could happen?
It's a real Bo Burnham inside situation where we're more comfortable virtually than in person. I heard that was like a meta commentary.
Also with us, the Godfather, Dave Harbarker.
I got a lot of other thoughts about Bo Burnham inside if we want to spend some time on that later. Maybe.
Sure.
I heard Shane likes to talk about it too.
I have a lot of thoughts about it.
Our bonus episode where we just
analyzing Bo Burnham's inside.
Yeah. Everybody's been waiting for our content on that.
I kind of liked it.
Same.
Is it harder or better when you can't tell that I'm making eye contact with you? Because when we were sitting in Dave's basement, there was a lot of hard eye contact.
I'm looking directly at the camera.
It just feels like you're always making eye contact with me, and that makes me feel cherished.
On this week's episode, it's time for some spoilers again. That's right. It feels like we just got through spoiler season, and it's already time to talk about Magic doing Dungeons and Dragons.
Here it is.
This felt really fast. Also, what's wild is like 95% of the set is already spoiled. Like it's live next week or something.
It's live before this episode comes out. I believe that that the set is going live on Arena and Magic Online on Thursday, July 8th. And this regularly scheduled episode will go live on Friday, July 9th.
Dave, we haven't put out an episode on Friday in weeks.
Yeah, we have a little bit of flex there, but we might come out the same day.
It's true.
So
maybe it comes out tomorrow.
Yeah, you never know.
I mean,
the set will not do anything to any of the formats we play, so it doesn't really matter.
Okay, no spoilers, Shane. Thanks for people are just going to turn it off now.
I might have a card or two that disagrees. But today, we are going to make some more of our famously informed evaluations for cards that roll a natural 20 in Modern and Historic, and maybe consider some critical misses as well.
How much did it hurt you to make those D&D-based puns, Stan? I felt you withering away from the microphone a little bit as you did.
At least I didn't have to write them.
Oh, fair enough.
We're going to warm up first with a quick check-in on the ever-evolving Modern format, as it continues to change shape thanks to Modern Horizons 2. It's starting to feel a little familiar, I'd say, but every week it seems to have a slightly new take on what the best deck of the week is, which is an exciting thing to observe and report on. But before all that, let's housekeep.
Some wild housekeeping this week.
Yeah, a really wild week in the Patreon this week, thanks to a grassroots community effort to push our episodes to the $500 a week mark so that we would hit our deck box stretch goal finally, that we've been hovering dangerously close to on and off over the last year. A few members of the Patreon, led by Jason, aka Kilgore Trout, decided they want to try to get us a push to that goal. And so I just wanted to say, before we got to the list of new and upgrading patrons, we just wanted to say thank you to everybody for the outpouring of support. We really appreciate it. Of course, we appreciate all of you every day. The ones we talk to, the ones we don't always talk to. We appreciate all of you.
We didn't ask anyone to do this. We didn't try to motivate and galvanize our patrons to give us more money. But
in fact, I would say I would encourage people not to give us money, because then there's logistics involved.
That's right. But
in these deck boxes,
people want the deck boxes. We haven't seen what they look like. We don't know what the logo was going to be, what type of art or style or construction they'll have. But it seems that the people want them, and we're going to do what we can to make them happen.
And so before we get too much deeper on that, I just wanted to say thank you to new patrons, Evan, coming in hot, and Cloudy. Thank you for joining us in the Dive Down Nation. And then the increased tiers list is where things really got wild, as while we were all together, or the day after we were all together recording, they all popped into the Patreon. And this is the list. Purple Plat, 2 Mickey S's. Not one, but 2 Mickey S's upped their tiers. Grant R, Jack L, Lou, Dom, Odin, and the aforementioned Jason/Kilgore Trout. We appreciate all of you. Thank you so much for pushing us closer to the line. And we're getting close. We're $60 an ep away from hitting that $500 an episode goal. So it's not, we're 15% away or so. So So if you want to join us, join the Dive Down Nation, help us get to this goal, and also get things like playmats and buttons and stickers and a bunch of things that are going to go out in the mail really, really soon. Check us out at patreon.com/thedivedown. Help us make this final push. You know, it's a kind of random time to ask, but we're getting close. And so everybody could get something extra. And the deck box goal, I believe, Shane, correct me if I'm wrong, is for people at $5 and up. They get a deck box. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
So it's lower. It's a lower goal than the playmat goal is. Of course, if you do the playmat, you get both.
Right on. Yeah. So patreon.com/thedivedown. We're also brought to you in part by Mana Traders. You can, if you want to sign up for Mana Traders, use code THEDIVEDOWN2021, all one word and numbers. Saves you 15% off your first 2 months there. We know that people have been using that recently, so we appreciate that. Of course, who's on the news desk this week? Who is it? Who wrote this?
I wrote a lot of this.
Well, then then Dave, you're on the news desk, my friend.
But I'm hoping that Modern Horizons 2 Watch, we're watching the horizon again. I think we can all hop in here pretty equally. You know, we had a couple of great tournaments to look at this week. The first one we had is a Modern Showcase Challenge. You know, I guess what Stan was intimating a little bit at the beginning of the episode is that Modern is still changing, still evolving. You know, MH2 seems to be, it was obviously having a big impact on things, but it's also it's continuing to change. It's not like there's just one deck that's hitting it over and over again right now. Although there's a lot of people think there's one card that's kind of hitting it all over and over again, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But we had a couple of events we wanted to talk people through. And so, like I said, let's start with the Modern Showcase Challenge, which was on Saturday, July 3rd. It's the first event of the weekend, and I don't know if you guys know, but there is a person on Reddit, Bamzing. We've talked about them a couple of times, who does a really excellent and quick breakdown of these events each time. We are looking at Bamzing's data for both this event and the next one that we have. A couple of notes that were interesting from this write-up, so thank you to Bamzing, as usual. They noted this tournament had 400 players in it.
That's a few.
That's huge for Magic Online right now, 426.
Yeah, I mean, what were the top decks? Like, did they go like 8-2 or something like that? Like, this was a lot of rounds, right?
Yeah, I think that the records were something like that to be able to go on. And of course, in these, we don't really have access to the broader field, the broader meta, but we do get to see the top 32s whenever we have these online challenges. And so here's what was in the top 32. I'm just going to read the top 10 decks or so right here and kind of take it from there. So in the number one slot of the top 32, there were 5 blue-red Murktide Regent decks. What?
Yeah, that's somewhat new, right? It's like a new spin on an old friend.
And we'll come back. After that was 4 mono-white hammer decks featuring Luris, 3 4-color footfall decks, 3 blue-red prowess decks, 3 black-red DRC decks featuring Luris, 2 Teamer Living End, and 2 Teamer Footfalls decks. Those were all the decks that were not one-ofs in this tournament in the top 32. And then quickly, in the one-ofs, there was a 4-color Grieving End, another kind of blue-red DRC deck that was a little mid-rangey, 5-color Scape Shift, Jund Ragavan, Grixis Shadow, Grixis Control, black-red Waste Knot, mono-red Prowess, Glimpse of Tomorrow Cascade, and a 4-color Velomachus deck. Not bad. I mean, the one-offs are much bigger than any of the large groups here, but the surprise to me, and I think the surprise to many people watching Modern this weekend, is that blue-red Murktide deck suddenly emerging as the top deck in the field of 32.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's not too surprising, perhaps, right? Because I feel like we're seeing a consolidation of power around red right now, and then red especially with blue. And I think we're sort of seeing what the two shapes of those decks look like. And the first one we have, the more popular one, at least this weekend, was this Murktide Regent based deck, which is essentially the counterspell, somewhat reactive version rather than the more proactive version of Izzet Blitz. And so we see for DRC, typically a couple Dreadhorde Arcanists just for like recursion, spell value, for Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer, and then of course for Murktide Regent. And Murktide Regent is the Delve flying threat. That's 5 blue, but of course has Delve. Enters with a 1/1 counter for each instant and sorcery card that was exiled when you cast it. And then whenever another instant or sorcery card leaves your graveyard, you can put another 1/1 counter on Murktide. So I think as some of these decks, they typically might have a few snaps just for some extra 1/1 counter value and just, of course, the value that Snapcaster provides. What's interesting about I'll just talk about the first place deck as kind of like maybe like a prototype of this, right? Or like maybe an example is
piloted by MTG Milan on Twitter or MZ Blazer on Moto, well-known online grinder there.
Yeah. So you might be like, okay, well, this is going to be somewhat different than our prowess style decks or the blitz style decks, but it's really not too much because it only has a couple counterspell. It has no force of negations. So like when I think about this deck versus the blitz decks, like let's say just a week ago, it would have a much larger counterspell suite. And I would say, I'm going to sort of out-tempo you with my Ragavan, get Ragavan value, and Dragon's Rage Channeler. I did it again. I said Challenger. To sort of dig through the deck and that kind of stuff. But I think this deck is not as reactive as the more tempo-y Delvery style that we saw. And it's interesting, sort of like just an evolution almost of maybe this is what Blitz is going to start looking like, but probably not.
Counterpoint. I don't think this is a Blitz deck.
I'm not saying it's a Blitz deck. I'm saying it's not as different looking from Blitz as we saw last week.
It does have some pretty serious diversions this year, of course, because the threat suite's totally different. I mean, other than Dragon's Rage Channeler, you don't have any prowess creatures in here. You're not trying to combo off, cast a bunch of spells in a single turn. Like you can't go that fast in this deck. Although I have heard people mention things like, oh, it's not that hard to get a like turn 2 or turn 3 7/7 off of Murktide Regent, which is kind of like, I haven't got a chance to play this deck yet. But it plays a lot slower. There's a lot more sorceries in this deck with Serum Visions and Sleight of Hand. Thought Scour is in this deck. You don't play that in Blitz. So it's a pretty different spell suite. But I do think that what you're saying in that there was 4 counter spells in this deck before and now there isn't is totally true. I just think this is like a bigger, kind of slower version of a kind of more midi kind of deck than Prowess, right?
Well, and then you can look down on the 5th place list. Like Freed Mania is another example of the 2.5 versions of this deck, right? Where we see 4 DRC, 4 Murktide, 4 Ragavan, and then they're playing 4 Counterspell, 3 Force of Negation, even a Spell Pierce main, and then 4 Unholy Heat, which is just like, let's play the full amount for my removal suite. And so, yeah, this is filling the graveyard with Thought Scours. It's filling the graveyard with removal and counter magic, but isn't going for the first place deck. What had the 2 Dreadhorde Arcanist, 14 threats instead of 12. And so we're just seeing different versions of this deck, I think, evolving very quickly in front of our eyes. And I think we'll continue to see this happen until the quote-unquote best list or the best list for the week continues to emerge.
Yeah, I think that's more what this is. This is what's the best list for the week is what's going to keep coming up here. And why Murktide Regent, though? And why now do you think this card is kind of popping up as a good threat that can hold a deck together like this together? Sam, what do you think?
Well, first of all, it's a cheap threat, right? This deck is designed to get it out for 2 mana usually. So baseline 2 mana 3/3 flyer, I think, is fine. But also, of course, it scales, but it's technically a 7-drop. So at 7 CMC, it evades a lot of popular removal right now. So if you are able to delve, even 1 instant or sorcery from the graveyard, it evades Bolt. You can delve enough instants and sorceries that it also evades Unholy Heat.
Right.
And one of the other premier removal spells that we've seen emerge after MH2 Prismatic Ending is never going to tag this.
Yeah.
So it kind of, I think it capitalizes on the lack of Path to Exile right now and just kind of those white decks in general.
Totally agree. And that's the big thing here, right? Is that this is kind of that Stormwing entity kind of axis where the removal that is popular to play doesn't line up particularly well against this. And so decks going into this weekend, maybe if they weren't thinking about Murktide Regent, for example, maybe Black-Red didn't have enough Terminate effects around to go with it. Maybe, there weren't enough Seal of removals in the decks that, like in the tempo decks in, Your Prowess playing Seal of removal or even Vapor Snag to just be able to pick this card back up right away.
Yeah, and remember like the first few weeks we saw a whole lot of solitude style effects. And I think people are leaning really heavily on, like you mentioned, Stan, like Prismatic Ending. Path to Exile is kind of falling out of favor, but we might see that kind of make a circle back because people are like, well, I can't always hit what I want, even though it doesn't ramp my opponent and it's super effective largely. But one thing that I do think is interesting that is a very good counter to Murktide is something that we see in the next sort of bucket of decks, right? Like these Cascade decks. There's a lot of these Cascade decks.
Yeah, so many, so that if you group together the Footfalls decks, Living End, and Glimpse of Tomorrow into a sort of like Cascade general archetype together, there were 9 of the top 32 were that. Actually, it's 10 of the top 32 is that.
And the card I'm getting at is Subtlety. Like Subtlety hitting a Murktide Regent is a blowout. And so I imagine that players who are good with this deck who go up against Subtlety decks probably hold up Counterspell. Like they're just going to be patient and wait till they have Counterspell and the mana required to get their Murktide out. But if you are trying to race one out and you're like, well, maybe this is the time I go for it, and you get that Subtlety, that is really nasty. And you all have been playing against various versions and playing with various versions of these Cascade decks, and almost a third of this top 32 is some kind of Cascade variant. What are you thinking? What are you feeling about these decks right now?
Yeah, so I did a league with the Teamer version this week, just because that deck has been really interesting to me. And I've noticed this back and forth among the MTGO players between going to 4-color so you can have Ardent Plea and 12 copies of the Cascade Rhino combo versus just the Teemo version with 8 copies of Cascade. And I think, what you're sacrificing by playing Ardent Plea is a little bit more interaction. You're cutting things like Bonecrusher Giant or maybe Subtlety, some number of ways to interact with your opponent. And maybe that makes sense if, Bonecrusher Giant, for example, doesn't line up with what your opponents are doing. But I feel like Bonecrusher removes enough of the creatures that are popular in the format right now that it is worth it. So maybe it's just the flavor of the week, and we'll continue to see these Footfall decks go back and forth between 4-color and 3.
I feel like the move to Dead and Gone is kind of replacing a lot of what Stomp is doing on the Bonecrusher Giant end. And like the dead side of Dead and Gone is just a 1 red mana instant that deals 2 damage to a creature. So like that's a perfectly good Magma Spray effect. Like even on turn 1 to stop a monkey, for example. And then we're seeing Dead and Gone as like a 2-of staple in these decks now. And it kind of just appeared last week, I think, when I was looking at these lists. I was like, what's Dead and Gone? And that was when I started seeing that in like the 8 players in that showcase challenge thing, or the Mox final.
I think the other thing we might see is people will want to play more Ardent Pleas and be more in on this combo when there's fewer Blood Moon effects, because this Ardent Plea deck has 1 basic forest.
Yeah. The one that I see in second place has an island. Yeah.
Yeah, it also has 1 island, but it's still, I think it's very vulnerable to Blood Moon effects, and the 3-color Teamer version can play Blood Moon, at least in the sideboard sometimes. So I think that's also part of the equation that kind of goes back and forth.
Stan, how did you feel about playing this deck though? Like, I kind of find it like kind of a bummer to play against these, and it feels a little bit like a really, I just don't know. It's one of those, like, you got to have something to deal with Shardless Agent somehow right away, or you die.
Yeah.
That's kind of a drag. I mean, and having to deal with tokens really early can be kind of like warping to having to deal with those. So,
and before you go and stand on that too, do you feel like these decks are actually powerful enough? Like, are Rhinos really good enough?
I'll answer the questions in reverse order of them being received. I do think the Rhinos are good enough. It's 8 power on the board with Trample. I think that's a lot to deal with. And as long as we have fewer Fatal Push effects out there and fewer Prismatic Endings, I think they're actually pretty hard to get rid of. And using an Unholy Heat on a Rhino token doesn't feel good. I already forgot Dave's question, but I think this deck is fantastic, in part because you get more than 2 Rhinos, and you can really get to this point where maybe you suspend a Rhino on turn 1 or not, but it's like after turn 3, you're threatening 8 more power every turn. And then those early turns, you do have reasonable disruption where you can actually like prevent your opponent from having a blowout. And for Bonecrusher Giant, one of the reasons why I have liked that card in the Temur version is it's a whole other threat too that they have to worry about that shocks them when they try to remove it.
Mm-hmm.
My question, and the reason that I'm like, are these decks really good enough? But they continued to win and see play. It was like the interaction seems a little mopey, like because you have to spend a little bit more to do what you want. Besides the split cards, sort of now interestingly taking advantage of costing more because of the combined CMC cost. Like it used to be kind of a cheat where it'd be like, well, this side is actually less for the Cascade styles, and so I can cheat it out. And so that's a kind of interesting way to be able to like, well, I get 1 mana interaction like on that undead.
You mean Cascade is just broken kind of in general because you get to game around it no matter what the rules are? Anyway, another time we'll talk about that.
So like, but what I'm getting at is like, so these decks have to stop the opposing battlefield or even a few creatures from sort of sticking and snowballing in a way that gets the opponent into a space that they're going to win. Like you don't have sweepers. You don't have the ability to like catch up against flyers, for instance, besides maybe like a Brazen Bower or something like that. But like Living End, for example, is like a Cascade deck that like just has a strong game plan against the creature-centric decks that we're seeing right now. Like it doesn't have to worry about losing the battlefield early. Like besides maybe like a Ragavan just getting a little bit out ahead and like getting a stronger creature out than it was prepared for, because you just flip the board so wildly when you Living End and just get your stuff back out and their stuff in the graveyard.
Mm-hmm. All right. Anyway, I think that's enough about the Cascade decks. Last question, Stan. Was it fun?
That's fine.
Was it fun?
It was very fun. Yeah, I might sleeve it up in paper. I've actually bought 3 Gemstone Caverns to play this in paper, and I might take it to the next Modern tournament in town.
You did ask me if I had any Gemstone Caverns. I'm sorry to hear that someone else did. All right, so one of the next things that surprised me about this top 32 is that the only Urza Saga decks in this top 32 were 4 Hammer Times. No food, no Titan. The world turns.
That's good, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting. I don't know if it means anything, this particular event, I don't know if it means anything that wasn't there, really. Like, I don't know if blue-red Murktide, for example, has a particularly good matchup against Asmo or green food or Golgari food or any of that kind of stuff. But I don't see anything that makes me feel like the power of those decks has diminished for some reason, but they're just not here this time.
Maybe they're vulnerable to counterspells, and maybe enough people are packing Endurance to make Urza Saga a liability that actually, gets them down on resources.
Right. It's interesting. But Shane, you're pretty into Hammer Time.
Yeah, I like Hammer Time a lot right now. I think, like I talked about, was it last week? 2 weeks ago? Yeah, last week. I think that it's a nice way to use food. I think right now, the food decks, because I also played some food decks in the past, and I think they get punished by counterspell.
Really?
Decks pretty hard.
Why?
Oh, yeah. Oh, because when you're trying to get an Urza out, and like your only counter magic is like, Metallic Rebuke or something like that, it can just be kind of rough to be like, I need to resolve an expensive threat to actually sort of turn the corner here. And then I think a lot of the other opponents that you're facing right now are prepared for Urza Saga. So you can't just say, I'm going to stick an Urza Saga and get 2 constructs down and just finish the game that way, because people are getting rid of your Urza Saga before you get that full value out of it. So I think it's a consequence, I think, of one, these tempo-y, countery decks getting a bit more aggressive while retaining enough counter magic, and then putting pressure on the food decks in ways that, like, if you want to get rid of a Murktide Regent, you better have 4 food.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? Which is not unreasonable at all.
But it takes some time and some effort to get there. All right, Blue-Red Prowess, still 3 of them. Still kind of what it is. It is the DRC version, of course, but people are kind of sticking with it for what it is.
Next to Hammer, it just seems like the next best aggro deck in the format, or consistently still among the best aggro decks in the format.
Yeah, I think it still clearly is. I don't know if it's tier 1 or if it's tier 2, tier 2, if it's one of the truly best decks right now, but it's still there and people still play it. I guess it's the deck that I have the first deck that I sleeved up right now. I'm just waiting for 4 copies of Paper Expressive Iteration to get here so that I actually have a modern deck to play in paper if that comes up for me anytime soon. What do we think of this top 32? overall? Any last final gut thoughts?
I kind of hinted at what I was feeling earlier, which is like, I think we're seeing like a really significant color balance shift right now. And I think green and white are just not really serious players outside of like the support role that we're seeing with green, and white is in hammer time. Like, remember when Solitude was the most played creature in like the league? It was just like everywhere. Like Solitude was everywhere.
Yeah.
Stoneforge was everywhere. There's no copies of Solitude in this top 32. The only decks playing Stoneforge in this top 32 are the hammer decks. I'm not saying that these decks and these colors are outmoded, but I think we're seeing like people really experiment and have fun with Grixis colors right now, and they're doing very well. Both Rakdos and Izzet, and even some Grixis style decks are killing it. I don't know. I think that I like that we're in a space where nothing is scaring me too much. Where I think that everything has weapons against it, and I think that we're going to see people respond to that, and in that fashion I'm happy to see that, because that's just part of the evolution of Modern that we're able to see right now. We weren't really able to see that before Modern Horizons 2, because things were so set and we knew what was happening and we knew the strengths and weaknesses of the decks, and now we're discovering those and seeing the evolution, and it's fun to be able to talk about every week.
Yeah, similar to what Shane said, I don't think anything is particularly scary at the moment, and even stuff that we thought was scary has sort of leveled out. Like Urza Saga, I mean, that was the first card to, people to talk about, that got people to talk about potentially bans.
It's everywhere,
and now it's not.
Yeah, at least in this event.
It's kind of amazing how quick the ebb and flow has been, because I think a week or two ago we were talking about how Footfalls is gone, and here we are. It's one of the most popular decks in the tournament, and I think that's kind of an interesting place for the online metagame to be. Makes me wonder where the paper metagame would be right now too, just because that one evolves at a slightly different pace, and I think it tends to be a lot more open. Imagine if there were SCGs right now. I am thinking about the impact of MH2 on aggressive decks in particular, and how or why Prowess is still like one of the premier aggro decks. And even though Footfalls and various food or saga decks kind of come in and out of the format, it feels like the Domain Zoo deck is just kind of gone. And it feels like Hardened Scales, like we haven't seen that make a comeback. We haven't seen it in the same ebb and flow as sort of these other strategies, or even the affinity-less or true affinity decks, right?
Just you wait about 10 minutes. We'll have something to say about Hardened Scales, but yeah.
Or even fewer, because it's on the next day's challenge.
Yeah. I'm going to go really quick over the top 8 of this challenge, just so we see what made it all the way through. So like we mentioned, MZ Blazer and Darth Kid split the finals of this. And so MZ Blazer was on Murktide and Darth Kid was on 4-color Footfalls. The next decks were 4-color Grieving End from Glacier 7, Blue-Red Prowess from the Nair, Blue-Red Murktide again from Freedmania. Shane talked about that deck. Mono-White Hammer from Hemuda. A kind of interesting mid-rangey blue-red DRC list from White Star, and 5-color Scape Shift from Corrado. The mid-rangey kind of 7th place deck here on Bamsing's write-up, it says that it's Jeskai, but I actually didn't see any white cards in it. It's
basically like Wear Tear in the sideboard, I think.
Oh, is that what it is?
Pretty much.
Got it. It was interesting because it's Sprite Dragon, Ragavan, Dragon's Rage Channeler, 2 Snapcaster Mage, and then it's just fully loaded up on counterspells. It's 4 Archmage's Charms, 4 Counterspell, 3 Force of Negation, lighter on removal. It's only got 2 Unholy Heaths, but 4 Lightning Bolts. So it's another iteration of that blue-red shell. So I feel like there's kind of like blue-red Prowess, super aggro. There's this kind of like medium-sized one here, which, it still only runs all 1 and 2 drops, but they don't grow as much, and it's got Sprite Dragon instead of Murktide Regent, and then the Murktide deck, which feels like the bigger version of it. So there's a whole bunch of blue-red decks floating around right now. All right, let's talk quickly about the Sunday Modern event, which we can talk about the top 8 really quickly. Actually, sure. I just got the top 32, so I'm just going to read out the top 32 breakdown to everybody here.
Oh, yeah.
4 Blue-Red Murktide in the top 32, leading the pack. And again, in second place, with 3 decks, is Mono-White Hammer with Luris, 3 Blue-Red Prowess, and then 2 4-color Grieving End. And that is all of the multiple decks that were in the top 32. The rest of the top 32 is one-ofs. And I'm going to read the one-ofs really quickly. So that means that there are, there's 20 one-ofs. So it's Hardened Scales, Grixis Shadow, 5-color humans, blue-white taxes with Yorion, 5-color elementals with Kahira, Abzan, Temur Footfalls, black-green food ad nauseum, green-white Heliod, black-red DRC with Luris, 5-color Scapeshift, 4-color elementals, 4-color Footfalls, black-white Metal Blade, mono-red Prowess, mono-green Tron, Esper Control, Bant Stone Blade, and Eldrazi Tron. That looks like fun. This tournament looks like fun to me.
Yeah, Modern's the best. Why not? Play anything you want. Have fun.
So this is the tournament where we saw not only our Heart and Scales players, but our Amulet players come back. Humans.
Taxes.
Yeah.
Elementals.
Ad nauseum.
Yeah. I like that one player is like, I don't need that 5th color. I just have 4 is enough for me.
My elementals are only 4. So yeah, the second place. So we talked about the first place list of this is a Hammer list. So Hammer 1.
All right.
It's an interesting version of Hammer because it does not have Giver of Runes in it, and it does not have what's the other card that Bamzing noted?
Is this the one with like Swift foot boots and stuff?
It does not have Esper Sentinels. So
yeah, this player I think they actually like placed in the top 32 on Saturday, and then they came back and won the whole thing on Sunday.
Yeah,
this is good enough.
It has Steel Shaper's Gift and it is back in it, and a couple other things like that. So interesting to see.
Dave, I want to ask you a question about some of these Rakdos decks.
Mm-hmm.
Because you played it a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I trophied with it.
Oh yeah.
Still riding that high.
What do you think about the castles or the legendary Kamigawa lands? Shinka, the Blood-Soaked Keep, and Shizo, Death's Storehouse.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting note. I think we would have spent a little bit more time talking about it if these decks had done better this weekend. They kind of did just okay. But those definitely had like a financial spike in the last week and a half or so, where they went from being like cards that people weren't paying a ton of attention to all of a sudden being like, I think $20 cards, $25 cards, maybe more. Yeah. I mean, I think they're cool. I think you don't really get punished for running them too badly because the deck was already running a bunch of kind of like, it was running Castle Lochthwain and stuff like that. And these cards come in untapped, right?
They do.
Yeah, so they come in untapped, so you don't get punished too badly. And what they really do in most ways is they let Ragavan get through. So it's like with the red one, you can make sure that Ragavan is able to win in combat, and so they have to give up a card to keep it from getting through, even though it costs you some mana. And on the other one, it gets evasion because Ragavan gets fear, the old mechanic fear. And I just think they're nice like utility things to have to make your Ragavans more potent as threat.
Yeah, I mean, connecting with a Ragavan's a lot different than getting blocked. I heard that.
Yeah.
On the internet.
Way, way different, right? And occasionally maybe you're going to have Kroxa do it or something, or Turok, but to get in for the kill. But I think they're cards that are totally worth running in this deck. So, but cool tech there.
Dave, speaking of Kroxa, I looked at my inventory, and the one that I was continually living under the impression I had 2. No, you have my second, and you own it now.
I do.
I'll never get that back.
And I bought another one so that I can play these decks as well. I bought all the cards to be able to finish playing this deck as soon as it went a little bit out of vogue. So we'll see what happens from here.
Speaking of stuff, I want to quiz you all because I feel like we're all itching to get back in the LGS. Stan's probably been playing with all of his other friends in paper already.
My rares binder's up to date, ready to trade. Trades, anybody? Anybody got trades?
What are you buying?
You guys know that
into?
The next like three months of walking into LGS is just going to be, I have fetch lands and want other things. And everyone's going to be like, but I have fetch lands and want other things. And you're going to be like, ugh.
Anybody need a Scalding Tarn? I got a Scalding Tarn.
Yeah.
So many Scalding Tarns.
Yeah, what have you been buying? Stan, you said that you were finishing up Footfalls.
Oh, what haven't I been buying, David? I have to use my inside voice so no one hears me. So, I finished Temur Footfalls. Now I'm trying to finish the blue-red Murktide deck. I need one more Murktide, and we're there.
Mm-hmm.
I actually bought a Murktide from our patron Grant. Thanks, buddy. I'm also trying to get this black-red Luris deck finished. So, I just need a Dalthi, and that's done. I'm not going to play with the keeps. I'm not going to play with Shinka and Shizo just because
I'm not going to try either.
I don't think it's worth it to spend $40 on those 2 lands.
They're also not easy to find. Like the paper supply of cards from Kamigawa is sometimes really difficult, especially if you're going to like go to our LGS and try to get them. Yeah. You know what I mean? So that's what you're up to, Stan?
Yeah. I think that's about it. How about you, Dave?
Kind of the same. I mean, I'm not trying to finish Footfalls, but I had to get Expressive Iteration to be able to actually play Blitz in paper. I had to be able to get the last cards for Black Red, and then also I had to be able to get finish this Murktide deck. So that's mostly what I'm trying to do, is just have those 3 decks around right now. Although I guess the other deck that I have that I could play, which I would consider playing, even though we haven't seen it much, is I would consider playing Jeskai Stoneblade. So I bought a Kaldra Complete to be able to do that too, because I never opened one in all the packs that I opened. Yeah, so that seemed like a no-brainer to just finish that up. And also, it's a deck that runs Counterspell and Lightning Bolt, and so, that's fun for me.
It's been so long. It feels like it's been forever since the set came out that I completely forgot that I also finished my playset of fetches and got a Kaldra Complete and got Ragavans to play the Jeskai Monkey Blade deck. I spent a lot of money on MH2.
I did too. I really don't want to say. I mean, I bought a set box and a draft box. And I had like the greatest draft box ever. I talked to people about this in the chat, but I had opened like 43 rares and 9 or 10 mythics out of the set. So like 2/3 of my packs had 2 rares in it essentially, and it was all garbage. It was like all garbage rares, but just through sheer force of will, I managed to be able to kind of recover the value.
That's not modern legal, Dave.
Yeah. How about you, Shane?
I mean, I don't know. I got a couple set boxes and opened well, and then I've just been trading a lot, like trading the stuff. I sold a couple Ragavans out because I don't need them. I'm not going to buy 2 more. I'm not going to play I don't have Force of Negation because I sold mine at GP Phoenix, and it's really impacted my ability to play any of these tempo-y decks because I'm not buying back in at like 4 times the price. So I'm kicking myself there, but there's plenty of other decks to play, like Izzet Prowess, and I upgraded Yogg with Ignobles and some Grists and finished Hammer, which I'm hyped about. And I bought my buddy who's into Russian cards online. He was like kind of selling out some stuff, so I bought back into some blue Khans fetches that I had sold a while ago in Russian, and I got the Russian Stoneforge for the Hammer stuff. So yeah, I'm amped. I'm amped to play some Hammer and paper probably, or maybe Yogg. I don't know. I need some weekend events at the LGS.
Yeah, I mean, as usual, Stan and I are building the same decks, and Shane is off in some other direction of good decks as well, which is pretty funny.
Golgari food.
Yeah.
Shane's building the decks that I'm going to try to put together in like 2 years for a gauntlet of cards that aren't shared across strategies.
Exactly. All right, should we get out of here and move on to the next segment? I mean, I know we didn't spend a ton of time on that Sunday challenge, but Hammer, Hardened Scales, Murktide, Grixis Shadow, 5-color humans, Blue-White Taxes, 5-color elementals, and Obzon were the top 8 of that event. Go check out Bamzing's write-up if you want to see, but it's interesting to see kind of a completely different top 8 than what we had in the other one. Even though some of the decks are repeated, there's also just kind of more decks in this one, so...
Yeah, so stick around. We're about to dive into our card evaluations for Adventures in the Forgotten Realms.
We have way too much time remaining in this episode.
Stay with us because we're going to start off with a super hot take, boiling hot take right off the bat. Don't touch that dial. Stay with us. And we're back. So, we just wrapped up the previous segment talking about how we spent so much money on MH2, and I feel better about that because I don't think I'm going to end up spending any money on this D&D set.
Wow. Okay, we're starting with a fire.
Okay, I'm just going to, before we get negative at all, okay? If you go back into the archives, you will hear me be excited and hopeful for the D&D set. I think we all were. I think we all were like, yeah, this should be cool. There should be some cool stuff. It's going to be neat to have not a normal core set. Maybe we'll do some neat stuff. And so far, I have to say, I'm a little bit anxious about this one. a little bit anxious. In terms
Too much
of,
power.
I mean,
Too much power
about-
at the mythic slot.
What kind of anxiety are you having? Exactly.
Well, okay, well, that's a good point. Well, I'm anxious that I won't have anything to purchase. Okay, I probably like won't even buy this on Arena. I won't even buy like a bundle. I'm just gonna like use wildcards or something. Because man, I hope I'm wrong. This is the most negative we're coming in to a set review, and I am apologize for it.
So welcome to our dive down section for this week, what I'm calling Venture into the Adventure. Card evaluations of Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. We haven't really talked about this set a ton, and it kind of crept up on us. I think we did a couple of early spoilers, a few, like when they shared a few cards, but this set's going live in like 72 hours, and this is the first time that I've really looked at the spoiler over the last couple of weeks, and I'll say, yeah, I kind of agree with all you guys. I do think there's a lot for people who like Dungeons and Dragons to be excited about here. And so actually the first thing I wanted to do is just ask you guys,
this is contextual. This is a contextual like and don't like from us.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, is it like, well, first thing I want to know a little bit, like, what about you guys in D&D? Like, what's your history with D&D? Like, were you into it when you were a kid? Was it a thing? You know, like, Stan, what's your history with D&D generally?
NA.
Yep. Okay.
I tried a couple brief campaigns with some friends here and there, and it just never really captured my imagination. It's not competitive enough, and I just don't really like, as a gamer, I don't really like co-op games. I like playing against a person or have team versus team, and like there being clear winners and losers rather than the choose your own adventure RPG style of a D&D campaign.
Oh, Stan is much more spiky. If you ever wondered how spiky Stan was before, now you really heard it though. Like, because I don't think you don't talk quite as aggressively sometimes as Shane and I do about like playing the best deck and stuff like that. But to hear you just be like straight up, I don't really like a co-op game. Like that kind of stuff is pretty interesting. I mean, that's mostly true for me. I will say when I was a kid, I was one of those kids who was pretty into like the idea of D&D, and I don't remember like where I found out about it at first, but I had the red box, like the 80s regular Dungeons and Dragons box. I used to go to the library in Lakewood and like check out the Dungeon Master Guide and the Player's Handbook and stuff like that, and the Gods and Demigods books that they had at the library. But it was one of those things where like I played with it a good amount when I was like an early teenager or like, 11, 12-year-old with friends and Boy Scouts and stuff like that. And like, it was always more fun to just like read the manuals to me than it was to play the actual games, I felt like. But I did have a lot of exposure to the gold box games that I don't know if people remember those from the 80s as well, like Pool of Radiance and Curse of the Azure Bonds and all these different like video games that were actually really good and really fun, like early PC kind of RPGs.
Yeah, I was more aware of those than anything.
I loved Pool of Radiance when I was a kid. Like I played it probably 3 or 4 times, and it was good. And I was very into the idea. I read the books, like I read the Icewind Dale books. I read the Drizzt Do'Urden books about the underworld. Like I was into all of that stuff, but just actually playing the game, I sort of like never got around to it all that much. It has been fun lately. We have been playing Pathfinder with some of the members of our Patreon, Lou and Jason and Mickey S, Shane. And so that's been fun to actually play a role-playing game for the first time in 25 years for me.
Yeah, it's a very different gaming experience because it's very improv-y, where it's just like, you have to learn how to play the game. The game is not the game. Like if you were playing it for like a dungeon crawling combat thing, like it's not what it is. It's just about like hanging out and like sort of doing trying to figure out, how do I role play as a role playing type person? At least for me, like what am I doing here? Like what are we doing together? How do we do this? And it's kind of like an interesting learning experience, at least for me, as like my first RPG in real life, or via camera at least. I think I'm the same as you, Dave. We're just like, I had friends who had like the 2E stuff that I would just sort of like digest. And like, I bought like the 3E stuff when it came out, even though I had no one to play with really. Like I didn't have a gaming group. I just liked it. I thought it was cool. But like, I think where we're going with this though is like, what is for people who are into it, Like, why are we bouncing off what we're seeing here a little bit, even though we had an interest at some point and thought like kind of the world is cool?
So coming in with basically no affinity for D&D, I will say that the allusions to the game are not lost on me, nor do they really distract me. So I think in a way it kind of weirdly benefits me because some of the stuff that enfranchised D&D players, I think, don't like about the set doesn't necessarily affect me negatively. And
yeah, like you're like, that's not a Terravor.
Right.
That's not Zorn.
And on the flip side, the stuff that the D&D players love is also kind of lost on me because it's just like any other Magic card or any other new set. So if this was branded, if the cards were exactly the same mechanics, but it didn't have the D&D branding attached to it, I would still probably feel the exact same way about it as I do now. It's like I don't care one way or the other about the D&D-ness of it. I just think that's marketing, baby.
Yeah. I mean, I think that they did a good job of like bringing in the flavor of D&D. Like it's strong. Like the flavor is strong. I wasn't quite expecting as much lore in this. You know, there's so many legendary creatures and so many things that are like really specific references to things that I don't even know about in Forgotten Realms. You know, it's one thing that I guess I forgot about with Dungeons and Dragons is like there are all these stories that sort of add up to a canon, even though it's something that primarily you're supposed to like make the story yourself. But if you think about like Forgotten Realms in particular, which is like the deepest world in D&D in a lot of ways, you know, there's like the Baldur's Gate games and there's the games that I was talking about from the 80s. And then there's like books from all over the place there. And there's all the individual modules that add up to that. And there's even like the old like Neverwinter Nights is also Forgotten Realms. And like, so there is a lot of stuff that I'm sure they're trying to balance to be able to get hints of it in.
Can I just get a quick elevator pitch? What does Forgotten Realms mean? Does it mean it's like part of a collection of stories? Like, is it like the Star Wars universe within?
It's like a plane.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a specific plane in the world of D&D.
So any module or book or campaign that takes place on this plane is considered part of the Forgotten Realms.
Yeah,
canon.
And I forget the name of the world itself. I'm trying to look right now. Don't send us an email, please.
Okay.
Don't send us email.
I got you.
Yeah, like Dave, the metaphor that popped into my head was like I was anticipating it being like sort of like a Marvel Cinematic Universe level of lore where like people be like, "Oh yeah, I know Captain America." Or like, "I know that Hulk is big and green and angry." But like the level of lore here is almost like I grew up reading the DC Who's Who comics in the mid 80s where like I know about like this weird villain's like origin story. And I know it's not quite that level of depth of like D&D knowledge, but this is definitely designed for D&D people.
Yeah, I mean,
who like know the books and know the game.
It's high up. I mean, the dragon that Driz Jordan gets one of his scimitars from is in the game. It's like Icing Death or whatever its name is. And when you kill it, it produces an equipment that you can carry. And it's like they went hard. They went hard into this, and it's a lot more than I was kind of expecting, where I thought it might be much more like...
I cast Magic Missile.
Yeah, I mean, I just put away... You know, I have... the only D&D book I have from when I was a kid is the Atlas of the Forgotten Realms. It's this book from, like, 1991, I think, that's, like, all these synopses and, like, maps and stuff, and I was flipping through that the other day, and I was like, there are so many stories in here, and, like, it's like they try to get all of them and put them in the game. So I think that, you know, I've heard like cursory from people who are into D&D or have friends who are into D&D that like their friends are reaching out to them to ask them about if they should try Magic and all this kind of stuff. And I hope that people do. I hope that, you know, this has been a long time coming for Wizards of the Coast to use this IP in Magic. And I think they did a quality job of it in lots of different ways. It's just like, I didn't realize how much it was going to be. Yeah.
I think if it's a successful set, a commercially successful set, we're going to see more adventures in the Forgotten Realms.
Well, and there's other worlds too. Like D&D has so many worlds that they could go to as well that aren't just... The Forgotten Realms is just the most popular one, I think, in a lot of ways. But they have other places, especially from if they go back in the 90s, there was 4 or 5 different kind of planes that people were really popular with.
Yeah, one of those like Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman books that like
was that Dragonlance?
Oh, that was Dragonlance.
Yeah, that's a different world. That's a totally different world,
man.
Yeah, and so I would imagine that might be the next one that they would do. But at any rate, so we spent a long time talking about this. Just to say, like, we see you, D&D people. I hope you're excited about it. But like Stan said, I feel like it's the mechanics and like the cards themselves that actually I think are making us all kind of scratch our heads a little bit. I think in the past when we've said like, hey, these aren't good enough, we've been wrong occasionally about like whether there was really powerful cards in the sets or not. But it was tough looking through this spoiler, not going to lie, to figure out like what the hook was or what we could really bring to people, for the audience for this show in particular.
Mm-hmm. Well, how about we start just by talking about some of the mechanics in the set?
Yep.
Because there's 500 of them, and we should probably list them all off.
Yep, exactly. So what's the first one?
I think the big one that we need to talk about that's groundbreaking and how it actually impacts the game design are dungeons and the venture mechanic.
Yeah.
So the 3 dungeons.
There's 3 dungeons that you cannot find on Scryfall. You have to like Google them. And what's interesting about these 3 dungeon cards in and of themselves is that they exist outside of the game. You always have access to them. They don't take up sideboard slots, and they're kind of just free. So if you ever play a card that lets you venture into the dungeon, and we might talk about some venture cards today, you can decide which of those dungeons you want to venture into and just do it. And it doesn't actually take up any slots or other resources in your 75.
Just takes up deck box space. So if you've got a lot of tokens, you double sleeve, you might run out of room.
Yeah. And it's interesting, like they're sort of like little mazes that you move through by activating this, by playing cards with this ability, venture into the dungeon over and over again. So it's this kind of like, there's all kinds of things. Sometimes it's tacked on a creature, sometimes ventures tacked onto a spell. But what you do is you get a little bonus each step of the dungeon you go through. And then when you complete a dungeon, there's some kind of bigger payoff at the end. But there's also cards that pay you off if you have completed a dungeon. They let you do other things, or each time you complete a dungeon, they have a bonus or whatever. This mechanic to me is like really mind-bending. And it's certainly something that feels like it's kind of like grafted onto the side of Magic. So it does feel like crawling through a dungeon in Dungeons and Dragons, but like, I'm worried a little bit in the sense that like, if one of these turns out to be good, we're just going to see this one dungeon forever and ever and ever.
Well, I mean, the real thing though is, and that's the kind of, right now it's like a perfect definition or representation rather of a parasitic mechanic, where dungeons exist now for eternity.
Right.
But the venture into the dungeon cards are only here. So the cards will have to be good enough to synergize with a dungeon that's also good enough, or perhaps at least the dungeon's adequate enough to make the payoff of the venture worth it. Like if you completed a dungeon, X happens, like you said, Dave, on some of these cards. But it's you can compare it to, let's say, just like energy. Like where energy payoffs didn't exist outside the deck. Mm-hmm. The dungeon payoff exists outside the deck. And so the energy payoffs were part of your deck as well. And so they had to like synergize with things. So all these venture into the dungeon cards have to do is be good enough on their own to see play, and then probably have to have a dungeon that's worth venturing through. But it's kind of just gravy at that point, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like the enablers have to be good enough, and then you can get this gravy for free. Whereas the energy, where you had both enablers and payoffs for the energy deck in your 75.
Yeah, but I think it's going to play fairly differently because these dungeons are not short. Like you can't just breeze through a dungeon. Like some of them are like 4 rooms, something like that. 5 rooms. What's the total of 1, 2, 3, 4? Do you have to go out the last room?
No.
Or so the last room is the exit. So 1, 2, 3, 4 is our shortest one. 1, 2,
3 is the shortest one. Tomb of Annihilation. You can.
Oh yeah, Tomb of Annihilation, because it's a real bad. It's very hurtful to go the short path.
I have an idea.
Of course.
Let's read off these dungeons.
Oh man, there's so many rooms though.
I know.
What's the flavor on them, Stan? Like what happens?
I don't No, the flavor.
Well, he means like what's the big payoff for each of them?
Sure. All right.
Maybe.
So we have Lost Mine of Phandelver. And the payoff there is you just draw a card. And that one seems pretty interesting because you can use it to make tokens. You could creature token 1/1 creature tokens. You can make treasures, gain and drain your opponent, give a creature's -4, -0, put 1/1 counters on your opponent. So you get some value throughout that dungeon. Tomb of Annihilation, that's the one that's really asking you for something, because the payoff there is to create a legendary 4/4 black god horror creature token with death touch, but along the way, you're losing life. You're discarding cards. You're sacrificing creatures, artifacts, or lands. You're oubletting yourself. Is that how that's pronounced? Oublet?
Sounds right.
Yeah, oubliette.
And then the hardest dungeon, I think this is the one for players level 15 and up, is Dungeon of the Mad Mage with the most rooms. And the payoff there is called Mad Wizard's Lair, where you draw 3 cards and reveal them, and you may cast one of them without paying its mana cost.
Yeah, and like the whole thing along the way is like, it's like you're doing a lot of scrying, you're sort of setting up your draws and things like that, right?
Right. Scrying, making treasure tokens, preventing creatures from attacking, making 1/1 skeleton tokens, etc.
So it's kind of like, that's more like the control deck one, right? Where it's sort of like the payoff is you're sort of like setting up blockers, gaining some life, setting up some draws.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, so
Fortunately, I haven't seen any cards that felt like they made it easy enough for you to go through a dungeon where I feel like I'm going to see these in Modern or Historic, with one exception.
yeah.
The one card that piqued my interest today was Acererak, which is 2 generic and a black for a legendary creature, zombie wizard. It's a 5/5, and it says when Acererak enters the battlefield, if you have not completed the dungeon Tomb of Annihilation, return Acererak to its owner's hand and venture into the dungeon. Whenever Acererak attacks for each opponent, you create a 2/2 black zombie creature token unless that player sacrifices a creature. Here's why this one is interesting to me.
Yeah, why?
It's one card you just use over and over again to go through dungeons that are not Tomb of Annihilation. So if you're in some kind of control list and you want to just go through a dungeon and have a card and get value off of it and just play this for 3 mana over and over and over again, this is a reusable card that lets you do that. Now, is there a way to break it so you go infinite in a single turn outside of EDH where you can do that with Allurin, then I haven't seen that yet, but I do think that this is kind of like, if there's a dungeon control list, this might be the thing that sort of makes that happen.
Here's my question. What makes this, in your mind, different than the Green Planeswalker that costs 4 up front, but then you just +1 every turn to venture into the dungeon?
That the payoff here is that if you want it to become a 5/5 eventually, you can make it a 5/5 threat. So it's a little more versatile to me than the Planeswalker, although the Planeswalker is like fine too, I guess, but that's even like the most narrow Planeswalker I've ever seen printed, where it's just like it's just this mechanic, but so that was the only thing I thought here. But kind of dungeons, I think, were mostly a pass. We're not going to talk about any ones that say venture on them from here. Why don't we go on to just like keep this moving? Next theme, rolling dice.
Oh dear.
Cards with a before X, or when you do X clause, you roll a D20. Very, very D&D-ish, right?
Now, can you roll any like 20-sided spin down, or does it have to be a different type of D20?
It depends on how many arguments you want to get in with the pedantic gamers at your LGS, because, there's a whole lot of different opinions about this, about what makes sense, what doesn't. A spin down is not properly randomized, quote unquote, for a dice, right? But at the same time, it's like if everybody's using the same type of thing, it's not a big deal.
Just watch how your opponents roll.
I also read some people who played HeroClix for years, apparently, who said that there was a controversy similar to this in their community, and mostly they found that it didn't matter once they did studies.
Weird.
I think the biggest thing to me is like, I feel like they did this in a really weird way. I feel like there's too many cards that have the D20 mechanic, and
so many.
And I think that the thing that's really weird about it is like they set this up where you get one effect from 1 to 9. So, 45% of the time you get one effect. And then you get another effect from 10 to 19. So 50% of the time you get this other effect. And then for a 20, you get something that's like really pretty good or moderately better. And so it's almost like the mechanic didn't quite like it's like they played it and then they said, we got to minimize the variance on this. So what are we going to do? We're just going to throw 5% bonus on top of everything. So you have to roll a d20 to like occasionally get this 5% bonus that's like meaningless. So
yeah, it's going to be a lot of work for not a lot of fun.
That's a great way to put it. That's kind of what I think too.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of tediousness and like, yeah, it's like you said, I think they're pretty flat. You can see the floor and the ceiling of these cards, and they're not drastically different. And it's going to be one of those things where you're like, well, I'm glad Arena is doing this for me. It sort of just spits the number out. I don't have to like chase some die 20 across the table. I think pre-release is going to be madness of people just sort of rolling stuff around, and I just wish that it was maybe like 3 or 4 buckets of like 4 or 5 numbers, right? Or like the main effect is like 4 to 16, and then it's just like the higher up stuff is just a little bit better. But I don't really like variance, and I think they get the feeling that Magic players don't love variance, and they don't want to build it into the game too much, and so it ended up just feeling kind of flat.
Well, there's tons of variance in Magic already. It's a deck of cards, and I think that's the main thing is that, and I do think too effect. That some of them felt pretty flavorful, but then on a lot of them, it's kind of like, cool, this ogre. It's like because they were trying to do like the Asfan thing, where they're like, in a limited environment, we want people to feel the core set mechanics. You end up with all these cards that are just like, why does this card exist? Which is like, fine, they're not for us, I guess, but whatever. So the only card that I thought was interesting, particularly because of the dice mechanic, was Delina Wildmage. And so I'll read this really quickly. It's 3 generic and a red, legendary creature, Elf Shaman. Delina Wildmage attacks, choose target creature you control, then roll a d20. From 1 to 14, you create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of that creature, except it's not legendary and it has exiled this creature at the end of combat. From 15 to 20, you create one of those tokens and you may roll again. I feel like with some of the dice re-rollers, there might be a way to really make just like an incredible amount of tokens really quickly with this, and that might be a little bit of like Splinter Twin vibes. I mean, it's not it won't be deterministic, but because there'll be some chance that you fail, but you might be able to get so many dice re-rollers out as part of some kind of deck that you're gonna get it like 70% of the time. You're gonna be able to attack with enough tokens to kill somebody early in the game. I don't know, but it was kind of an interesting. This one kind of stood out to me as being something that was really powerful with the dice mechanic.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at 2 cards that they must have checked their archives for dice rolling like triggers, like things that triggered dice rolls, because like Brazen Dwarf is 1 in a red for a creature dwarf shaman, and whenever you roll 1 or more dice, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. Like if you had some way to just sort of like, I'm going to roll 20 times somehow, like I'm just going to figure out some way to trigger a reroll, then Brazen Dwarf is going to finish off my opponent. Or something like Feywild Trickster, 2 in a blue that makes a 1/1 blue fairy dragon creature token with flying. So that's like a Splinter Twin thing, right? Where it's like, if I had some way to just roll infinite number of dice, I can make infinite number of blue fairy dragons or something like that.
Right.
But they must not be, because Brazen Dwarf would be easy to break.
We'll see, I guess. Brazen Dwarf is cheap, at least. It's 2 mana, right?
Yeah, that's like it's like the cycling deck payoff. It's the die rolling deck payoff.
Kind of, right?
So we just had, it wasn't a proper limited theme, but a handful of cards in MH2 that involved coin flipping.
Mm-hmm.
How would you feel if all of these roll a d20 cards were coin flip cards instead?
I would also hate it. Yeah.
Yeah, I would also not like it.
Yeah.
More or less?
Honestly, I'd probably like it even less if it was flips, because the die roll at least is, I feel like it's easier to roll a die onto a table than it is to like flip a coin onto a table or onto your hand or something.
Good point.
I can't remember who made this point, but one of the strongest points I've heard in defense of the D20, this may have, like, a friend of mine may have said this at the commander table, but something that the D20 contributes to in games of D&D, or so I'm told, are these very memorable moments when you have a critical roll and things go great.
Yeah, that's what I'd love to have. And but I feel like the cards aren't conducive to that. That's kind of like my major issue, right? It's like, even if I rolled a 20, it's like, I'm gonna feel like I'm not gonna like have something amazing happen.
Well, how amazing do you want it to be? Like, do you want roll a d20 and win the game?
No, I mean, that's why I think it doesn't really fit the game of Magic, right? It's like, if you want a 20 to be memorable and do something incredible and like literally win you a session, like where you're like, I would be dead if I didn't get this amazing roll. Or I've had that happen in Gloomhaven a few times where it's like I'm with my buddy and it's like the last swing on the boss of like this certain campaign, and it's like, oh, I pulled the double damage. I did like 17. Oh, he's dead. Oh my god, we did it. And like that just can't happen in Magic because it's like too swingy.
Mm-hmm. But it does happen in Magic all the time. It's just called a top deck, is what it is. Like that's what a critical role is in Dungeons and Dragons. It's a top deck in Magic.
It already exists. We don't need dice to recreate it.
Yeah, and I'm not too harsh on that. I just think that it just got flattened. It feels like they got flattened out a little bit too much to me in some ways. Like they don't do enough different things, I guess. Like if you want a really memorable event, just have it do something totally different that you weren't expecting. But yeah, I don't feel like we're going to see a lot of these, but we might see a couple get through. Okay, creature lands. Obviously not a D&D theme, but I thought that these were pretty interesting land designs, personally.
Yeah.
They come in sort of like tapped lands. If they're your first or second, or sorry, not tapped lands, fast lands. If they're your first or second land that you play, they get to come in untapped. And they're all monocolored. There's a whole cycle of them. They produce a single color mana, and they all turn into creatures of reasonable sizes. They're all kind of like pretty big creatures. They're kind of 4 mana to activate, 5 mana to activate. I think the blue one is 7 mana to activate.
6.
6 mana to activate.
Yeah, these aren't like your treetop villages. Like they're not like an efficient cheap beater to activate.
Yeah, but I do think that there's 2 pretty good ones. One is the Den of the Bugbear is the red one. And so what that one that says is if you pay 3 generic and a red until end of turn, Den of the Bugbear becomes a 3/2 red goblin creature with whenever this creature attacks, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token that's tapped and attacking. It's still a land. I mean, that's cool. It makes 2 creatures. It's also a goblin, so it has some tribal synergy stuff that I think could be good for certain decks, depending on where you want to go with that. That one felt like kind of a slam dunk for me, as like I feel like people are going to be keeping an eye on this to play for sure, whether that's in historic or in modern. And then the green one was just spoiled today. It looks like it's called Lair of the Hydra, potentially. And it is X green. Lair of the Hydra becomes an XX green Hydra creature until end of turn. It's still a land. So it scales.
Yeah, I mean, that's killer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It scales pretty slowly, but at least it scales. Like, so it's that's advantageous where it can, if you're making a lot of green mana, and there are decks that can make a lot of green mana, then that's certainly a perfectly good threat, potentially.
But I like these cards a lot. I think that they could be good. They're not, they don't provide mana fixing. So I think there's a reasonable chance that these end up in monocolor decks of certain persuasions. But, I think that there's a lot of power here. Especially if you think about some of the decks that we're running, like Faceless Haven, for example, where in historic, where you're like, well, it's kind of free for me in mono blue tempo, the deck that used to exist that was mono blue tempo before the archives came out.
Some red decks, some white decks.
Yeah, where it's free to do that, and then you just run these lands that don't produce your color of mana. They just produce colorless. These ones kind of get around that, where they do produce your color mana, and they're still creatures that are probably pretty good. So I think there's a good chance they're good.
My issue here is that there's a bigger tension than typical between like the number you want to run to have one early, and then top decking one even the mid game or late game, and then having it come into play tapped, because like a fast land could be your 3rd land and still be untapped.
Yeah.
These, it's it cannot be your 3rd land like you mentioned, and I think that's a bigger tension, especially in a monocolored deck, or like many decks that are more controlling want to run a few different colors. So it's like, when am I going to have the time to have this come into play tapped blue land when I'm like a 3-color control deck? I don't know.
Well, that's why I think that the aggressive ones are probably the ones that are more likely to get played. Just because, if you don't get as wrecked by bringing in a comes into play tapped land later when you're an aggressive deck, because your curve is so low. So sometimes you might be okay with getting a creature. It's going to have summoning sickness anyway. So if you play it with the intent of using it aggressively and it comes in tapped, it's not a big deal a lot of times. But
I kind of think that you can play these in any monocolored deck in lower power formats. Mm-hmm. Like in historic, almost certainly standard, but historic and maybe pioneer. I think if you're in a monocolored deck, there's no reason not to play these.
Yeah. I think that some of them have to be, I think again, like Shane was saying, in a control deck, it's sometimes harder to want this, or maybe a mid-rangey deck. It's okay later to have that comes into play tapped. Maybe you can only play a couple, like he said. I think it does depend on your deck style if you can play them. But especially the really expensive one, like the blue one is kind of like, okay, I guess we are going to be a control deck that's just okay with having it comes into play tapped land. I mean, we had Celestial Colonnade forever in Modern, and it was good enough as a finisher. Decks like that tend to just have Shark Typhoon these days, so I don't know how good a creature land will be there, but I could see running it as a 2 of, even in a deck like that, one of the blue ones or the white ones.
All right, let's get through these classes.
I think these are very cool. I think the classes are really cool.
These are cool.
I think these are the best designs, the best D&D inspired designs in the set.
We want to talk about them, Dave? You talk about them then.
Yeah.
You're feeling high on them. Go. Let's talk about these.
So these are enchantments that are sort of like give you a class in a weird way as the player. So you get to, they're just called Barbarian class or Paladin class or Bard class, and it's just an enchantment subtype class. And it's kind of like a little bit like a Saga crossed with the old level up mechanic from Rise of the Eldrazi, where basically when it comes into play, you get a thing from it, and then you can pump some mana in it to move to level 2 and to level 3. And they do a whole bunch of different things, and there's a lot of them in this set. There's Fighter and Bard and Monk and Paladin and all these different things, all the different classes you can be in D&D.
I think one important distinction with these compared to sagas is that as you level up, you retain previous abilities too.
Yeah, you gain abilities with these. These aren't like, they do have some triggers occasionally, but they also don't get sacrificed at the end. When you come to level 3 or something, they're just kind of there all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there was a couple of really notable ones. So the one that stood out to me was Bard class, which is red and green. And it says, legendary creatures you control enter the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on them. That's level 1. Level 2 is red-green to get it. And it says, legendary spells you cast cost red-green less to cast. This effect reduces only the amount of colored mana you pay. And then finally, it's 3 generic red-green for level 3. Whenever you cast a legendary spell, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play them this turn. There's a whole bunch of legends that just cost a single red or a single green or red and green by themselves that you can... I think that there's enough here where you can chain together a deck that just casts most of its spells for free and then potentially has some kind of payoff based off of that. And, even if you get to the point where you get up to level 3 and you start to draw extra cards and play them as a result of that, I think that there's a lot of different power in this one just because of the mana reduction. But I don't know what you all think about it.
Excited to find out. I would give an honorable mention to one other class. I think the Cleric class might be interesting in Historic because it's 1 mana to cast originally, and its baseline mode is that if you would gain life, you'd gain that much life +1 instead.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the Angels decks that already occasionally play Authority of the Consuls, or at least will play it post-board, having that with additional upside that might be a mana sink later on could be good, because the upside later on is at level 2, whenever you gain life, you put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. And then when it becomes level 3, you can return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield and gain life equal to its toughness. So I think you can save, it basically it helps you grind later in the game, or earlier in the game it can kind of help expedite your plan as well, while also supporting some of those life gain synergies too.
Yeah, I think this one's pretty good, actually. I'm glad you added it in there.
Yeah, I always think enchantments that are trying to that are support enchantments for you are frequently hard to use because you have to figure out how you're going to fit them into your strategy, right? And when you're going to have the time to cast them or level them up. And I feel like a lot of the enchantments that I actually see play are enchantments that are hindering your opponents in sort of hamstringy ways, like whether it's a Blood Moon or Alpine Moon or Rest in Peace or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. And so I am more than happy to see something like this do something cool, and we'll have to wait and see. But I think that they're balanced. I think that none of them is screaming busted to me besides maybe, like you said, Dave, this Bard class one. Like if you combine it with a play creatures off the top of your deck style effect type thing, where it's like some Nissa Planeswalker or something like that, or Vivian Reed rather, play creatures at the top of your deck, and then you have legendary spells really cheap, and you sort of just chaining that together. I think it's something that we could feasibly see play in like a Pioneer or historic environment.
Mm-hmm. The last one I really liked is Paladin class, just because its entry for a single white is a tax effect on your opponents where they can't cast spells on your turn unless they pay extra. I think that's a nice kind of taxing effect that a lot of decks would be annoyed with. Might not be a main deck card, but it does do some stuff where, it does an Anthem for its level 2 that costs 3 mana, and then for 5 mana for level 3, you get whenever you attack until end of turn, target attacking creature gets +1/+1 for each other attacking creature and gains double strike. Imagine throwing that on like an Archon of Emeria or something like that in those kind of white taxes decks where you have a flyer, plus all of a sudden you're attacking with 4 things, and all of a sudden it's swinging for like 8 damage, 10 damage, something like that. I think these are cool designs. I think they're interesting. And then the last mechanic that we had to talk about was pack tactics.
Mm-hmm.
Pack tactics, I think, is actually good, and there's a number of cards that I think could actually do this, but basically it's like Battalion. I don't know if you guys remember Battalion, where it was like if you attack with 3 creatures together, it gets a trigger. This is if you attack with creatures whose total power equals 6 or more, something happens. There's a bunch of good cards that go with that, including the first card that I would put on that list to note is Werewolf Pack Leader, which is green for a 3/3. It is a human werewolf, and it says its Pack Tactics trigger is that it draws a card, which I think is pretty strong, and then it also has the activated ability of 3 generic and a green. Until end of turn, Werewolf Pack Leader has base power and toughness 5/3, gains trample, and is not a human. It's pretty good for a 2-drop. I think.
Well, so you're just paying 4 there to give it +2/+0, right? And trample,
and
+2/+0 on trample.
Yeah.
So, but then you only need one other attacking creature to trigger tactics.
Exactly. And so it's a little mana sink that occasionally sides you into drawing a card. I mean, this is a type of card where, like, if Gruul was still a thing in Historic, I would be like, Shane, are we trying this in Gruul? Because it's a great way to draw cards. It might be better than Galia, for example, or something like that, because it's more consistent and things like that. But
Gruul is a thing in Historic.
Is it still?
It is, yeah.
I don't know. It's probably a thing.
That's good.
As far as I know, the only things that exist in Historic right now are Izzet Phoenix and Dimir Control. And
Gruul is
that's
good.
it.
Play Gruul.
I have another Pack Tactics card that
Okay.
I think is potentially okay, but probably not. And it's Minion of the Mighty, single red kobold with menace.
Mm-hmm.
And then it has Pack Tactics, et cetera, et cetera. But its payoff is you may put a dragon creature card from your hand onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking. It's an 0/1.
Mm-hmm.
So it's either a bad combo with like a double infuriate draw, but it does cheat dragons into play. But the dragon has to be in your hand, which I don't like.
Well, I think
it's probably bad.
What's interesting about this card is I think it incentivizes you to play multiple dragons. And then what ends up happening is they just kind of snowball, because this by itself, unless you're putting pump spells into your deck, this is never going to help trigger the pack tactics. It's kind of like a signal pest where you have to attack to get a thing out of it. But once you have maybe 1 or 2 dragons out there, they just sort of start to beget more dragons with each attack step.
It's likely not a thing, but I did want to point it out.
I mean, I think it's a powerful effect. We'll see if someone figures out a way to do it.
I gotta say, what's impressive about this episode so far for me is how much time we've managed to spend not talking about cards, which I think maybe points to how uninspired we are with this set. So maybe
I think it's table setting, Stan.
It is table setting, that's for sure.
And we've got about 30 minutes to talk about cards as a result of that. So it's got to be just the bangers.
Yeah, maybe a little less. I have something prepared for the end of the episode. But
that's true.
Oh.
What if we start with a quick little round robin of what we think is currently the best card we've seen?
Oh, man.
Okay. Other than the ones we've talked about already. So we'll just set those aside. Because I think there's a chance that Werewolf Pack Leader is one of the best cards in the set.
Okay.
Wow.
But, I mean, that's unfortunate, but I think it might be. I think there's a chance Bard Class is one of the best cards in the set. I think there's a chance that Hydra's Nest is, or whatever, Lair of the Hydra or whatever is one of the best cards in the set. But anyway.
May I present for your consideration? Treasure Vault.
Oh, yeah. I left that off my list by accident. Yes.
Yeah. So this is a rare land. It is an artifact land. It enters untapped, taps for colorless, but it has this added ability, XX tap, sack Treasure Vault, create X treasure tokens.
Now, why would this be one of the best cards in the set?
Because I think untapped artifact lands are good.
And they're good specifically in Modern we're talking about here. It's not.
Correct.
This is not a thing
Yes.
in Historic or Pioneer, really.
I think this is probably going to be a Modern thing. Unless you can get it back out of the yard with Emery's, where it might get a little interesting. But I was doing the math where you need to basically spend 4 mana to make this worth an extra artifact. Because otherwise, if you spend 2, you make a treasure token, you have the same number of artifacts on the board. But the fact that we have an untapped artifact land, and artifact lands in general used to be sort of this line that we were really afraid to cross. They're banned in Modern, of course, because of how effective they are in affinity-style decks. We got some new affinity cards in general as well. You can't get this with Saga, or can you?
No, because it has to have a mana value of either specifically 0
Gotcha.
or 1. So
Right.
no, you can't.
Right. So although, maybe it doesn't have some obvious synergies right now, I just think having an untapped artifact land is really good that you can then mana sink to make extra artifacts from. And the fact that it taps for colorless, I don't actually even think is that bad. Imagine this on turn 1 or 2 with an Urza Saga on turn 1 or 2, where you can make huge constructs with just your lands out there early
Yeah,
on.
and then cast Thought Monitor. This is like a Soul Ring for Thought Monitors. So that's a whole thing too. I think you were right that might be one of the best cards in the set, but it's for a really specific reason, and it's extremely powerful in Modern that this card exists.
I mean, it's the only untapped artifact land besides Darksteel Citadel.
Mm-hmm.
Even Power Depot comes into play tapped.
Yeah. Shane, what do you have as your pick is what might be one of the...
Okay, I was looking through the cards. I still think not in Modern because of Prismatic Ending. I still think Portable Hole is really good. I still think Portable Hole is quite good. It reads, it's a single white mana artifact. When an ETBs, you exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls with mana value 2 or less until Portable Hole leaves the battlefield. It's, of course, tempting to compare it to Prismatic Ending now, but remember, that's only in Modern, and you can't hit a 2-drop for 1 mana with Prismatic Ending.
Yeah, and here's the big thing, too, is that you can't kill Prismatic Ending.
Mm-hmm.
So Portable Hole, someone can disenchant it, and there's a lot of disenchant effects
right now,
flowing around right now.
That's an issue. Is from when this got spoiled early, and this is like a very early spoiler, I was very, very high on this card. I was saying, this is going to be something that Blue-White Control is playing in Modern, and I think it's going to be better for... I think I was on record saying this is going to be more important for Azorius Control than Counterspell is. And if we didn't have Modern Horizons do what it did and give us things like Prismatic Ending, and then also give us an environment in which Disenchant and Shatterstorm and all those kind of effects are everywhere, that does put a bit of a wrench in my machine of loving Portable Hole, my engine of Portable Hole loving. A fly on my Portable Hole ointment.
Well, right, but you're talking about Modern. We play other formats, and I think Portable Hole could be a staple there.
So really what I think is that this is still going to see a ton of play in Historic and Pioneer. I think it has a chance for Modern, but I think that Ending is so good that it's not going to, it's going to overshadow Portable Hole, but I think Portable Hole is going to see tons of play in our other formats. I don't know. I think it's great.
I love it.
All right, so I have to pick what I think the best card
reaching.
that's left is, and I'm going to say Demilich.
Wow.
I guess is the card that I think might be.
Wow, really?
I just feel
It
like
looks like it should be great, right?
that's the thing. I'm going to fall for it. I'm going to be the person who's like, it feels like this should be a great Spells Matter payoff somewhere. So Demilich is blue. Skeleton Wizard. This spell costs blue less to cast for each instant and sorcery.
Wizard.
Yeah, nice. Bring him back.
Ooh.
In case you ever wondered what a Lich was, just tell people it's a Skeleton Wizard. It costs 1 blue less for each instant and sorcery you've cast this turn.
Mm-hmm.
And then whenever Demilich attacks, exile up to 1 target instant or sorcery from your graveyard, copy it. You may cast the copy. It's a 4/3, and it also says you may cast Demilich from your graveyard by exiling 4 instants and or sorceries from your graveyard in addition to paying its other costs. So, I mean, the real deal here is that if you can play, you can bring it out early. It's also a Thought Scour payoff, of course, And then you can also, cast 4 instants or sorceries and bring it back with the same thing, because you will reduce its cost to 0 and then have 4 instants or sorceries in your graveyard, and you just kind of go for it. But it doesn't have evasion, which I think is the thing that most people look at when they look at this. They go, does it fly? No, it doesn't fly. It doesn't have trample, doesn't have menace, doesn't have anything. So I could see that being a problem with this card, but I just feel like there's a lot of text here and a lot of power.
Yeah, you would think that this skull head hovers at least, but maybe just rolls around the floor.
Yeah.
Doesn't even have leaping.
I mean, Lich is such a iconic creature type for D&D 2 that's kind of setting off some alarm bells for me. So I don't know where this goes, but I still feel like power level wise, it might be the best.
Casting 4 instants and sorceries in a single turn is easy. I think getting this for free or cheap is really easy. You can turn 2 this in Modern with Manamorphose, right? Manamorphose, Lich.
Well, you just
have to make blue with the second one. Yeah.
But here's the thing, though. I think I'd still rather have Storming Entity. Like, Storming Entity sets up your next 2 draws.
Right.
It flies.
Right.
It has prowess itself.
Yeah. Storming Entity doesn't have recursion, though. And I wonder if what this is just kind of like this random 1 or 2 of that you can maybe get through the late game in controlling or mid-range games where they have answers for all of your creatures. And this is just a recursive threat that now they need graveyard hate for as well.
Yeah, I think it has potential. It reads like a card that should do something. It's a mythic. It's a Lich. Like, why not?
Let's see what the pre-order is on this. Well, you go ahead. I'm gonna check back with you about that in a minute.
It's $23, Dave.
$23. Okay.
Can we talk about another flying flaming skull that actually does fly?
Yes.
And a little bit on the nose, it's Flameskull. One red for a flying creature skeleton, cannot block. It has rejuvenation, which I think is like one of those made up
fake words.
Fake.
We didn't talk about that
keywords.
Flavor in these D&D keywords. I think those are fun. For the record, I think that they capture
it's not unfun.
Capture some of it a lot, but it is funny to see all these ability words that are just like one-offs in the set. But anyway.
Yeah, so apparently this creature probably has some kind of rejuvenation ability in D&D world. When Flameskull dies, you exile it, and if you do, you exile the top card of your library. Until the end of your next turn, that's key. I think that's very cool. Till the end of your next turn, you may play one of those cards. Okay, so what this means in effect is you will have an exiled Flameskull and an exiled other card from the top of your library. And then until the end of your next turn, you can play one of those cards. If you cast Flameskull, you can't play other. They're very explicit about this. If you cast Flameskull this way, you can't play the other card, and vice versa.
Yeah,
it is a 3/1. So that's a thing. It's just gonna keep coming back if you want. If you want to keep paying for it, it can keep coming back from exile. You get until your end of your next turn to do so. Why not? Why not having Flameskull?
I think this card is cool too. I'm glad to see that you kind of thought that this was at power level too, because it felt to me like I hadn't heard anybody talk about this yet, and I was like, it seems good, kind of like it does.
You can Coco into it, Dave.
Yeah,
I don't know why. I mean, many other creatures can as well, but you can Coco into it.
I mean, it kind of casts light up the stage when it dies because you can play a land off of it. I mean, you only get to play one of the cards, of course, but
that's the issue.
Yeah,
it's like it's not like you can play one of those cards this turn. Do you know what I mean? It's like you only can get one of the 2 ever.
Right. Flameskull lead to the hard choices, Stan.
Yeah, and if you play that land, then you don't get to play the Flameskull.
Right.
Which I think if you get the land, you probably would rather play Flameskull. So you have to do some weird sequencing with this as well, where you don't cast anything on your first main phase, see what happens, and then if it survives, maybe you recast it. You don't recast it, but maybe if it survives, then you can cast other stuff, or if it dies, you just recast it and make your opponent keep spending cards on it.
Totally what I think too. I mean, it gives you a lot of options, it feels like. Maybe this does go in your Coco
Flameskull deck.
Coco Skelemental.
Yeah, Coco Skelementals.
My Jund Skelemental deck with no Lurrus.
Jund them out, baby.
Not better than Lurrus, though.
Yeah, that's always going to be tough right now. Lurrus.
And note that card is like $17 pre-order. So this is the
Flameskull is too? Interesting.
Yeah, this is what we're digging into for our pricing on this set for constructed purposes, at least.
Interesting. Okay. So, Stan, you want to go next on the card you want to talk about?
Sure. Yeah. So Dave, this is actually on your list of cards, but I'm going to call it out because it's something I would cast, which is the Circle of Dreams Druid. GGG for an elf druid 2/1 that has tap, add green for each creature you control. So it's kind of like
2/1.
It is a 2/1, yeah. So it's like a slightly worse Elvish Archdruid because it doesn't also pump your board and it's only got 1 toughness.
That's a lot worse.
That is worse, but it produces so much mana that I think it makes it worth it for just rule of 8 reasons. Because Elvish Archdruid is so often one of the best cards in your deck, and it's not entirely because of the Lord effect. It's because you have so much to do with a ton of mana.
I see.
Oh, but would you play, like, you don't, what are the other 3-drops in elves that like see play over something else?
I mean,
do you mean like what are you playing in the 3 spot? Well, even in historic elves, you're not playing like a pile of 3-drops, are you?
You don't play a lot of 3-drops, but like sometimes you have Marwyn the Nurturer.
So I guess what I'm getting at, Stan, is like rule of 8 doesn't always mean you want to play 8, right?
Right.
Maybe we're playing 6. Yeah.
Maybe you're playing 6, but my point is that what it does is that it produces so much mana that it makes it easier to maybe like cast your Craterhoof earlier, or pay the 7 mana ability on your Elvish War Master, or the 6 mana ability on your Allosaur Shepherd. That having more tools to make all that mana, I think, is really important.
And potentially just worth the extra slots on its own.
Correct. Yeah. Like, I think it might just be better than Marwyn the Nurturer, for example.
Right. Which you're running sometimes in a couple of 1/2 of kind of range, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the card just stood out to me as just being super, super powerful. And the other thing to keep in mind is like, this opens this effect up to decks that are not all elves.
Correct.
And so if you're generating tokens, if you're doing a deck with, I don't know, I mean, I just think about a card like Colony Garden suddenly, where it's like you play a land and you get a creature, and then later on you get to play Elf Druid and you have your plant token out there. Like, it lets you do other stuff with this that maybe opens up that big mana style of big mana archetype outside of elves specifically, but also redundant with elves.
Dave, are you up?
I guess I'm up. I have more of a curveball, I think, because this is a card that just seems powerful, but I don't know what you would do with it. And that card is Mr. Oswald Fiddlebender.
Oh, this card's good.
I don't know what particular property Oswald is from. He looks like he likes an airship, from what I can see here. And what Oswald is a generic and a white for a 2/2 for a legendary creature gnome artificer that has magical tinkering. You pay white and tap it, sacrifice an artifact to search your library for an artifact card with mana value equal to 1+ the sacrificed artifact's mana value, put it onto the battlefield, and shuffle. Activate as a sorcery. So it is a birthing pod kind of effect for artifacts, which, at one point in time we called those tinkers. But it's interesting to see this type of effect. It seems really powerful to me. I'm sure there's some artifact chains that you can put together that get you a benefit from sacrificing the artifact and also from an artifact coming into play. Just seems good.
Yeah, I mean, even as something as simple as like a chromatic effect, those draw a card when they go into the graveyard. There's all sorts of annoying. I mean, we know from history of playing this game.
Yeah.
That nothing about cheap artifact synergies can surprise us. You know what I mean? There's always something that someone's going to cook up that's going to do something interesting. And I think Oswald has a chance to be a part of that, especially in maybe our lower powered formats that we cover.
Yeah, that don't always already have access to certain other effects, or just, need some redundancy in those kind of artifact synergies potentially.
Yeah, I mean, what's good about this is it's cheap. Right, like it's only a 1 mana, plus a tap, of course, like ability, and it just can stick around and do some stuff for you. I think that's cool, even if it does something once. Like, let's say you're just like, I'm turning my chromatic star into or chromatic sphere, which I think is legal and historic. Correct? Which chromatic effect is?
Yeah, one of them. I don't remember which one. But.
Star, I think. Just turn that into something a little bit better. It's maybe like part of a lock piece or part of an artifact combo synergy, and then that might be good enough. Who knows? But there's some stuff to be had here, and I think we'll see it part of a larger synergistic deck on Magic Arena.
What's the best thing you can get if you sack an Ichor Wellspring? Or
At 3?
Yeah.
I mean,
three is where stuff gets more interesting. I mean, Bridge is not in Historic, right?
No, it's
No,
not.
that'd be really good.
But Ichor Wellspring is, right?
Right.
So you get all this extra value from it as well.
Sure.
yeah, because you draw a card when it comes in and when it goes away, right?
I mean, that's the kind of stuff that I'm thinking about too, just in the back of my mind, Sam, where it's like, what's our Ichor Wellspring? What's like our, the Flourishing Fox? What's the Sad Robot? You know what I mean? Like, what's all the stuff that is either just raw value or synergistic value or combo-ish that this card can support? And I think that exists.
Yeah.
All right, Shane, I think it's your turn to do this. We're going to go 1 or 2 more rounds, right? Because
I've got a couple. There's a couple I think that actually have potential. And the first is Grim Wanderer, 1 in the black, Goblin Warlock, 5/3 with Flash. Wow, that sounds really good, Shane. Oh wait, it has the immortal evergreen a keyword of tragic backstory. Cast a spell only if a creature died this turn. Okay, that's not a big deal if a creature died this turn. This is in black, a creature with Flash, 5/3, 1 in a black. Yeah, that's great. Like, I mean, that's going to see some play. Probably not in Modern. Pioneer, Historic, you're going to see this card get cast, and you're going to be like, whoa, that was quite the turn of events. Like, they killed the creature. They flashed in a 5/3. I tapped out to like attack in, and then they're swinging back at me with five power. That sucks.
Yeah, I like this card. I can't believe it's a goblin. It's very funny that it's a goblin to me.
Doesn't look like a goblin in the art at all.
Yeah, that's weird. I do worry a little bit about definitely more so in historic-y kind of spaces. I think if you ever, I mean, it's a pretty aggro card, right? Where you're kind of like, I'm going to kill some of your stuff, and then I'm going to get out a big threat for cheap. Seems possible.
It's the Flash. The Flash is what makes it.
That's true, because you can do it on either turn. Then,
yeah, I mean, if it was just like some dying synergy, you know what I mean? Like,
that's cool. Stan, what do you have next? Are you done? Was that it for you?
Well, in terms of cards that I'm excited about, I might be done. In terms of cards that I'm keeping an eye out for,
I mean, there's stuff worth keeping an eye out for sure.
Here's one I'd love to pick your brains on. Yuan-Ti Malison.
Yeah.
It's 1 in a blue for a snake rogue. It's a 2/1. It can't be blocked as long as it's attacking alone. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, venture into the dungeon. So the rogue deck in Historic, and Standard for that matter, has really good rogues in it already. And for that reason, I think the threshold for new creatures entering it is quite high. And the rogues you really want to keep an eye out for is anything with Flash, because especially in Historic, it's a very flashy, almost controlling deck. But the fact that this ventures into the dungeon for free and is essentially unblockable, while potentially like lording up and filling opponent's graveyard if you have the blue-black flyer lord, Soaring Sky Thief, I think this is one that could make that cut, just because that extra dungeon triggers is free.
This is one that I looked at too as being one possible card that was cheap enough and could get enough repeat value on venture into the dungeon. Mm-hmm. So I could see it if there is something, maybe there's a reason to make rogues into a venture deck because you can grind out some extra value with the threat or something like that.
Yeah. I don't think it's solving any of rogues' problems.
Right.
Which is maybe one of the issues with this card, but the fact that it has some sort of inherent synergies with the deck, and being a pretty threat-like deck in the first place, attacking alone isn't really that big of a setback either.
Mm-hmm. All right. My next one that I have is, I wanted to talk about the Hand of Vecna. Do we think this is a thing? 3 generic for legendary artifact equipment at the beginning of combat on your turn. Equip creature or a creature you control named Vecna gets +X until end of turn, where X is the number of cards in your hand. Equip, pay 1 life for each card in your hand, and then equip 2.
Whoa. Oh, so it has 2 different equip costs. You can either pay the life or pay the equip 2.
Yeah.
I mean, that's cool. At the beginning of combat on your turn.
Can you do that first, equip at instant speed?
No. It would say that on it if you could.
Yeah, I think equip defaults to sorcery.
It would say pay 1 life for each card in your hand, equip Hand of Vecna to target creature, kind of the way whatever the other card is written.
We're thinking about the same
Cranial
other
plating.
card.
Yeah.
Cranial plating, yes.
I just didn't remember the templating of that one.
Yeah. I don't know. I kind of thought this card was like maybe a cool thing. I don't know exactly where it would go, but it feels powerful to me. And the cost is medium high, but it's not too high. I mean, it's the same as a sword. Of course, it doesn't do as much as a sword, but it seemed pretty cool to me.
The thing that makes this intriguing is just the free equip cost.
Exactly.
Right.
As a bailout, if you're like way ahead, you can just get even farther ahead.
Yeah. I would not be surprised to see this not do much, but I do think that it's definitely worth watching because you can definitely do like a protect the queen or king type strategy, protect the royalty type strategy, where it's I've got a flyer, I've got some blue counter magic, I've got a grip full of flash cards and interactive spells that are going to protect my things, and my flyer is +5/+5, and I'm just going to protect that thing for a while. It's not my favorite. It's definitely a fun way to win when you win with it for sure, but I don't know if that's like when are you going to get the 3 mana artifact down in a deck like that. So
yeah. All right. Do we want to do one last lightning round and then go on to the wind down?
I think that there's probably one thing I'm surprised neither of y'all brought up was Sphere of Annihilation. X and a black artifact. It ETBs with X void counters on it at the beginning of your upkeep. Exile the Sphere of Annihilation. All creatures and planeswalkers with mana value less than or equal to the number of void counters on it, and blah, blah, blah. You know what I'm saying? They come out of graveyards too. It just basically blows stuff up with X or fewer void of the number of void counters that you paid, and it's only X and a black. It's an artifact. That's the only reason I'm interested. One of the only reasons I'm interested in this is because there's a lot of ways to get artifacts out of your library to tutor them up and therefore I think that it will probably be some kind of thing in a black-based control deck in Historic and Pioneer. I'm certain I will see this get played against me on Arena.
There you go.
Thankfully, it exiles itself, so you can't like Emery loop it and stuff like that. That would be nonsense.
But you could put it in a Luris deck.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, a pretty powerful effect for a Luris deck to have.
All right, Stan, what's your last shot?
Here's another, for your consideration, a potential best Eternal card, and that's Devour Intellect.
Ah, you took my last pick. That was mine too. Go ahead.
Well, here, you take it. I can throw one other one at you.
I was just going to say, I mean, how much should we how excited would we be if we were able to, it feels like extra thought seizes with Ragavan is honestly what I was thinking about. It's like,
totally agree.
How bad is it if you just cast it on its own? Not great, but the ceiling is huge if you manage to cast it off a Ragavan treasure. So
yes, and it's just so easy to make treasures in modern and other formats right now too.
Yep.
All right, you can have that one. Presented for your consideration. Another one that I think is probably only historic level. Eye of Vecna.
Yeah.
2 colorless for 2 generic mana for a legendary artifact. When it enters, you draw a card and lose 2. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, you may pay 2 generic. And if you do, draw and lose 2 more. You can play it with Luris because it's only 2 mana. You can potentially draw a ton of cards off of it. I think it's okay in multiples. And I wonder if this is a new thing that you can use to enable a Death Shadow deck in Historic especially, because that's a deck that's just not getting there yet. And I think Death Shadow is such a powerful card that this is a pretty powerful effect to maybe help enable that creature.
Interesting. I also was thinking about this honestly in like auras out of the sideboard or something where you gain so much life that you don't care, or where you're like, okay, I'll just have this in my sideboard, and if I want a personal Howling Mine to just draw even more cards. But you draw a lot of cards in auras anyway, so that's not really the trouble generally. But interesting with Death Shadow.
Shane, do you like either Eye of Vecna or Devour Intellect?
I don't think that Death Shadow just needs more way to lose life. I think it needs a lot more. So I don't know. Eye of Vecna, yeah, they're both sweet. They're both great cards.
We got it.
I love them.
So we'll probably talk about some more cards from this set next week. If we find more to talk about, see how things shake out for a few days.
Yeah, we might have some hands-on experience by then. This depending on what breaks out immediately after the release of the set.
Exactly.
We're going to take a quick break, and then I have a surprise in store for my co-hosts and the listeners. They didn't know that this
we
was
love
coming.
surprises on Mike.
Yeah, I just came up with this 10 minutes before we started recording, and we are going to run with it, so stay with us. And we're back. So guys, I've actually put together a bit of a mini game for us to play as part of the wind down. We love games. Why not? We played it on the show. And
Are we venturing into the dungeon?
similar, kind of. Yeah, let's call it that. Let's call it the Venture into the Dungeon game. What I need you to do to play along with me is to close Scryfall.
Okay.
All right, it's already been closed.
All right, it's closed. So as you know, this set has 500 to 600 different ability keywords that only appear on one card.
Yeah.
And what I would love to do is read off some of these keywords, and to the best of your ability, I'd love to hear you guys either tell me what the keyword does or the name of the card that it's on.
Oh, this is good wind down
Okay.
content.
That's
You
fun.
like that?
Yep.
I'm gonna lean back.
All right. What does tie up do?
Ding ding ding.
Is this real answers only, or is this
Yeah.
wrong answers only?
No,
I'm dinging in.
Yeah,
Are we
I'm
dinging for
gonna-
this?
yeah, we're
I'm
dinging for this.
I'm gonna guess that it taps target creature. It doesn't untap during the next its controller's upkeep.
Yeah, that's it.
Do you know the name of the card that it's on?
It's on the 10 zillion feet of rope or whatever.
Yeah. Yep.
50
feet of rope.
Good job. It costs 3 to do that, to tie up, but that is the ability.
Oh heck yeah!
You're not looking at Scryfall, are you?
Type. No.
Okay.
I'm leaning back away from my computer.
What does Bewitching Whispers do?
Ding.
David?
I think, does it make you discard a card from your hand? Oh.
Shane for the steal?
Bewitching Whispers. Does it steal something of mana value X or less or something like that? I'm bewitching it. Poop.
It makes target creature block this turn of Fable.
Oh, that's pretty good. Doesn't that card, the card that's on, also have another ability that's also a whisper of something? It's like Whispers of the Dead or something.
Whispers of the Grave. Yeah, it's on Shesra Death's Whisper.
Yeah, there's a lot of whispering going on in that
A little
card.
on the nose.
Yeah.
I should have whispered that question.
I love the villains that have a whisper is always really funny, but then when you think about what they sound like when they would actually talk, it's like, imagine them in a movie where they're just like, pss, 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 like constantly just,
I love gold.
All right. Here's one. I'm trying to stick to cards that we haven't talked about today to make it a little harder for you. I think this might be one of the longer abilities. It's called Dark One's Own Luck.
I know this card. This is like look at the top card of your library and you may play it if something happens and you have to, isn't it something like that? Like it's, all right.
Shane for the steal.
Does it involve a die 20?
Ostensibly, yes.
Whoa. Is it one of the results of a die 20 roll? Is it like the 20?
No,
I'm
does
just
this let you get an extra roll?
No.
So
So
is this Krark's thumb?
no. So this is on
Quark's Whisper.
All right, this is on Faraday, Devil's Chosen,
Yeah.
which is a tiefling warlock. Whenever you roll one or more dice, Devil's Chosen gains flying and menace until end of turn.
Oh.
If any of those results was 10 or higher, draw a card.
Stan, give us a softball on the next one or two.
Okay, this one should be easy. Keen senses.
What?
What is
Keen senses?
Yeah, what does it mean if a creature has keen senses?
Every time I attack, I scry 1.
Dave, this you should know this. This is an underhand T-ball pitch.
I don't think I know this one. Is it Keen Senses? Is it, I don't know, look at the top card of your opponent's library and put it back?
You guys are making it way too hard on yourselves. It's on Owlbear, and whenever Owlbear enters the battlefield, you draw a card.
Oh.
Well, it doesn't really make sense.
Keen senses.
What's the name of that green version of Curiosity? Isn't it Keen Sense?
Oh, I don't know.
Am I out of my mind? All right.
All right, last one.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
I want to make sure I want to make a hard it. Make one that's hard since it's the last one.
Yeah, the other ones were so easy.
Yeah. All right, here we go.
The flavor of this set.
Okay, what does
It's inscrutable.
Brave the Stench do? If a creature has Brave the Stench.
That's the one. It's like when this creature, I remember reading it today. It's like there's this zombie thing that, like, or a skeleton, that when it dies, you can either Brave the Stench and like get it back out of the graveyard, or you can like let it rot and like something else happens, right? Like, and I think it's just a way to get this card back out of the graveyard.
I think you get a treasure for it. I'm going to say, if you Brave the Stench, you get a treasure.
Oh, like you're digging through it, like you're looting it.
You guys are so close and yet a bit too far. Shane, you're talking about the right card. It's on Shambling Ghast. It's a single black for a 1/1 zombie, and when it dies, you choose one: Brave the Stench or Search the Body.
Oh, jeez.
Brave the Stench
so the Search the Body was a loot. Okay.
Yeah. Brave the Stench, target creature an opponent controls gets -1.
-1. Yeah, that's it.
Search the Body, Dave, create a treasure token.
I remembered that from the card, but it was the wrong one.
Hey, we got there together, Dave.
All right.
Good game, right?
Yeah, beautiful. Let's play this every week.
Should we go into game design? Or just me by myself?
Absolutely.
All right, great. Listeners, let us know if you like that, or send us ideas for future games that we can play on the Wind Down.
We're just going to slowly just complete our evolution into Good Luck High Five.
Is that what they do?
Way more fun than us.
I've actually never listened to their show.
Oh, they're boatloads of fun.
I don't doubt it. I love their commentary. But for now, that wraps up this week's show. If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to our podcast so you get the latest episodes as soon as they come out. And if you use Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating and review. If you'd like to submit a question to us or pitch a game for a future Wind Down, you can tweet us at The Dive Down, all one word, or email thedivedown@gmail.com. If you'd like to support the show, you can find our Patreon at patreon.com/thedivedown. If you'd like to support us while playing Magic, you can sign up for Mana Traders using coupon code TheDiveDown2021. All one word. Get 15% off your first 2 months of renting Magic Online cards. As always, special thanks to the bands Nowhere and Spaceblood for letting us use their music. And until next week, get out there and venture into the dungeon. Baby, we are here recording tonight, all night. Tonight's show is gonna be right, all right.
Put my episode under the tree for me.
We're recording our podcast tonight.